All right, good evening, folks, and welcome. We are thrilled to have you with us as we discuss turning global headlines into teachable moments. We have a great panel assembled tonight with folks from Awaken Librarian, PBS News Hour Classroom, the Financial Times, and CFR Education. We are going to dive right in. As you are getting connected and your Zoom is logging in, I wonder if you could open up that chat window and take just a moment to type in what is your biggest challenge in addressing news and current events in your classroom. And we'd love to just hear some quick thoughts from the group and hear what kinds of things you're thinking about. What is your biggest challenge in addressing news and current events in your classroom? Let us know in the chat. And as we do that, we will head in introducing ourselves. A couple of words. We are scheduled for an hour, and we're going to do our best to keep to that. We will talk for about 45 minutes. I have some questions prepared. These lovely folks have some wonderful thoughts and examples to show. And then we will have some time for Q&A. Feel free to ask your questions at any time using that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Type it in, and so they will be there waiting for us when we get to about 45 minutes past the hour. We will do our best to answer some of them, probably not all of them because we've got a great group tonight, but please do put in your questions as they occur to you. In the last 15 minutes or so, we will see what we can do to talk about them. So one more time, if you haven't yet had a chance, type in the chat, what is your biggest challenge in addressing news and current events in your classroom? We'd love to hear. But we're going to dive in and just say a couple quick words about ourselves, who we are, and where we are coming from in this conversation. My name is Charlie Hopkins. I work at CFR Education, the educational arm of the Council on Foreign Relations. I come to this work after a decade in the high school social studies classroom, and now at CFR Education, I work with teachers and educators who are teaching about global issues, such as some of the ones you see here on your screen. Over to you, Victoria.
Hi, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here. I think it's such a good topic, and I think I'm looking at all the comments that are going on right now. And yes, we do need resources, and we want to hear from you too. What's worked for you when it comes to teaching current events, especially international news? I taught for several years, but I'm director of PBS News Hour Classroom and have been here for the last decade.
Great, thanks. And over to you, Jean.
Hello, everyone. I am Jean Darnell. Some of you may know me as Awaken Librarian on social media handles. And I have a vast background in education, about 25 years. My most recent title was Director of Library Science. And I am here to show you how you can tackle some of the things from an educator's perspective. So hang in there because I have lessons and resources to share with you.
And Andrew.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Andrew Jack. I'm the education editor at the Financial Times and oversee a program offering free access to all of our content to high schools. So we're trying to, looking at some of the folks' challenges here, provide insights, align our content to different curricula, and also encourage students to engage with global awareness and media literacy. So great to be here.
Thanks, folks. Thrilled to have you. So the first question I want to throw out to the group, why do we teach global current events? What's the point anyway?
Okay, so great question. And I'd love for Andrew to maybe hop in on this one with me too, just because we do happen to both work at news organizations, but also come with the real educator lens. And so to make it relevant, yes, so that kids can really feel connected to others around them, maybe if they're even on the other side of the world. So we talk about everything in terms of current events. So we have our UN Security Council prepare sanctions against Iran for their nuclear program. We covered the UN. So a lot of you guys might be into like UN sustainable goals. So some of these issues, that story might be just too serious or too heavy or whatever you're facing in your classroom. So you can approach the UN in other ways too, again, through those sustainable development goals, ending poverty, helping others, trying to make the world a better place through cleaner environment, lofty goals in many ways, but kids really like those. Gen Z protests topple Nepal's government. This just happened a couple of weeks ago. That's Gen Z. And then we have a story that we did on Brazil's former president being convicted of an attempted coup. So those are real serious news stories that we have going on in the world because they are going on in the world. And that's the reality. It just has to be right for your class. I think that students are really curious. They're curious to know what life is like in other parts of the world. It helps them understand themselves better. And I fully think it's probably going to it will strengthen our democracy when we learn this stuff. So I don't know if Andrew wanted to hop in on that last point.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's really important for people to be engaging with what's going on in the world as part of their own insight. Whether they're thinking about future careers, whether they're thinking about themselves as participants in civil society, as voters, current or future, and to just gain insights and awareness of things that are going on around them that might be otherwise picking up, but maybe in distorted ways. So to kind of get them regrounded in the issues that matter with high quality content journalism, whether from PBS or the FT or others, I think is a really important way in. And as Vicky was saying, of course, the connections to the past are really important. So really so we learn the lessons, so we think about them, so we reflect on the context of history and how things are evolving.
I mean, this is the perfect story in many ways, like so many things you see in the news of why history is important, why social studies as a subject is important for reading, writing, and thinking. So we have done many stories on Gaza, on Israel. But this story that we just did was talking about genocide that the UN deemed was going on, this UN commission in Gaza. So we had lawyers on offering their opposing viewpoints. I see that there's many people here in the comment section who just want those different perspectives. I know that's two, but I think it does represent a lot of, the differences out there. And then from there, take it a little further. And one way to do that is this lesson next to it. So we included a lesson from CFR Education, Council on Foreign Relations. So they're the ones who invited us here tonight and are hosting, and we love sharing each other's resources. All civics organizations, I think, should do that. So what students can do, they have a whole lesson about what is genocide and how did that term come about. And they have a few really neat graphs on there talking about, serious events. This would be under that category.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And at CFR Education, we are all about cultivating global literacy. We see that as being so important to cut through some of the noise, connecting dots across different events and issues that the students may see. For us, when we talk about global literacy, at base, it is that ability to understand and engage effectively in today's interconnected world. And so, unlike what Andrew and Vicky and their organizations do of sort of reporting what happened yesterday or today, we're about building that base knowledge so that when that news story breaks, they understand some of the concepts, the themes. They know what the word genocide means. So when they see a headline that includes the word genocide, they can activate that knowledge, cut through the noise, connect that learning, and then be ready to have a conversation or to act on what they're reading about. Jean, did you want to, before we jump to the next, anything you want to jump into about why you think it's so important to talk about global current events?
Absolutely. It's important because our students and our youth are primary resources. They cannot turn their heads away and stick it in the sand. I feel like we teach current events because we want to show them, I know as an educator, I want to show them the tools that they can do so they can affect change. The whole statement, be the change you want to see in the world. The reason why we teach current events is because we want them to be aware, to connect with what's happening around the world, and then to take those steps. They have such rich platforms that I didn't have a chance with in the 80s that they have now at their fingertips, and they use those resources and they affect change. I think what happened in Nepal and India, it was fascinating how quickly things escalated, but and also changed. I think the reason why we had the new election of the prime minister is because our youth got out there and they said, you know what, enough is enough. We really want to see change. We don't want to talk it. We want to see the change. And I think that's one of the things that's so empowering with our youth and why we have to keep them focused on what's happening in the world. Because when they get involved, stuff gets happening. I don't know how they do it with their magic little social media fingers and all that, but they do affect change and they do affect our headlines. And we got to give them that platform. They deserve a seat at this table because this is the world that they are inheriting from us. And we need to show them how to be the light, be the good, be the help.
Yeah, thanks. And that point about how what started as a social media protest in Nepal is a great segue into the next question we've set for ourselves. How is the digital environment, and we mentioned things like TikTok, like AI, changing how to teach the headlines? Andrew, you want to share a little bit from this report about how people are getting their news?
Yeah, so this is each year the Reuters Media Institute, based in the UK, does a poll with some really powerful insights from different countries around the world. But there are some differences, but there's an awful lot of common points. And it's what we're all seeing, as we were discussing earlier, a sense of news avoidance or disengagement from a lot of current affairs, a huge switch in where people get their news, both in the formats, the platforms, which is moving, as we say, increasingly to video and technology driven approaches and away from text and paper, of course. And also kind of moving from a traditional model where you go to a core trusted media outlet to this sort of more horizontal pattern where people refer stuff to each other amongst friends or through influencers on social media. And if you flick to the next slide, please, Charlie. So you see here this trend with the explosion of online content as the orange line here at the top as being the dominant way in which people are getting their news, and way lower, of course, and continuing to decline is print. And the next slide, please, Charlie. And there you see this sort of broader issue about news literacy in the US and how fewer and fewer teams are saying that they're actively trying to stay informed by covering the news. So that whole issue we were talking about. So yeah, it's a big challenge for all of us. We, like PBS and others, CFR, are kind of increasingly thinking about how we reach out through these new platforms and new formats to try to engage younger people where they are. Not easy, but at the same time to try to get them to still recognize the importance of the underlying source, the quality of the brand and the organization that's sharing insights.
Thanks, Andrew. And Jean, you have this great activity that we were going to share about.
Yes, so one of the things I love to do is empower our youth. As I was saying earlier, we got to give them the toolbox for them to build a better world. And so on this slide, we have 3 different ways that students have led with advocacy. And so that top corner with the little Instagram QR code, that happened on January 20th when our youth were concerned as far as the direction of our country, and they immediately took to social media. Social media is their number one primary resource. TikTok and Instagram, if you can break it to them there, you're going to have their attention. And so that's one aspect of it. But I want to talk to you about that top right picture. That's a young man. His name is Datavion Daniels, and he was upset. I'm originally from Texas. I try to hide my accent, but he was upset because a lot of the books were being banned in Texas. There was a big list that went out, and there was 850 books banned, and he was quite upset about it. So he took it upon himself. He got in a library. He invited groups of friends. He bribed them with pizza and whatnot. And he was like, look, this is what's going on right now in our legislation, and I want to do something about it. And so he did like a grassroots effort of who's going to help me? How are we going to affect this change? We're just not going to accept this. And so he ended up winning our Intellectual Freedom Award for the Texas Library Association. And so the reason why is because he took something from nothing and he created what is called SEAT. It's his Students Engaged in Advancing Texans. He created his own grassroots organization to combat the book bans. And so I thought that was an excellent opportunity to demonstrate how students can take the narrative and flip it in their favor. If you feel like your voice is not being heard, go down to the legislation capitol office and say, hey, I'm a student, I have this group, these are my concerns. Will you listen to us? Will you work with us? And so he did that, and his organization flourished in the state of Texas. And then, of course, we've already discussed this, but TikTok, Discord, Reddit, all of that led to that protest. The same can happen here. I want our kids, though, to do it in a healthier and safer manner. And we have to give them a place for their platform for them to express their voice, because they're not going to stay silent, and they shouldn't. This is their country and they have input, and this is their world. And so we all have to be global and compassionate, empathetic, and let them lead.
Thanks, Jean. I think I'm seeing a lot of comments about just the controversy and how to teach that in terms of ways to do it so you don't get the backlash, I guess, so that you can, do your job and not feel that there's other big ramifications. So one way that I really encourage is through that media literacy lens. I was on a phone call earlier today with Peter Adams of the News Literacy Project. They're a great organization for news literacy on how to talk about international affairs, but all stories. But one of the things he said is, be careful when you're having them like evaluate the news sources, because I was saying, like, we always include a question where they if there's bias in the news hours report, or who else would they have wanted to interview, or what other questions would you have asked? But to know that freedom of speech and these fundamental freedoms are so important, freedom of the press, that you don't necessarily want them to tear apart the media just for that purpose. I mean, obviously, if it warrants it, yes, but to really appreciate what goes into a news story. So this definition by the main media literacy organization goes through how to evaluate, how to create media. And another issue I hear teachers talk about all the time that I'm hearing a lot more for AI, and I'd love anyone who has any tips or experts they recommend, but just the copyright issues involved in doing some of the digital stuff, because we're teaching our kids, to give credit where credit is due. And someone worked hard to get their ideas and this idea of intellectual property, but just to respect. So that's a question that comes up a lot. And so just to be aware of that when you're sharing information, that there might be copyright issues.
I think that's where librarians can jump in, because that's in our wheelhouse of understanding, verifying and vetting resources. So libraries are usually a safe place where everyone can express their voice and their opinions. And I think if you reiterate that in lesson buildings, or you co-teach with another educator, you can say, hey, this is a safe place for all ideas. But we also encourage you to see whose voice is not represented in the resources that you choose, and then figure out why. Let's investigate that. Let's dig a little deeper and make sure that, everyone's opinions have the light of day, and that there are no violations, because we know with a lot of generative AI, Vicky, this is my background, but with a lot of generative AI, sometimes there are data sets that are produced that are hallucinations. They're not true. They're fake and they're made up. And that's a genuine concern. And we need to, focus our attention as educators into that transparency of where the information is coming from, and making sure that it is true, verifiable, reliable information. I can't express that enough.
Yeah. And just to add on that, I totally agree. I think, a number of other media literacy organizations talk about this idea of lateral reading. So before you do a Google search and, click on the first link that comes up, which of course is often sponsored and not the best, do a little bit of research on the organization itself that the web link's related to, and ideally compare with some other organizations that are coming out with information on the same theme as well, to really think through the differences and question, what the agenda might be or who's funding them. And then, of course, we were saying on AI, there is this huge risk of hallucination. I mean, happily, at least now, a lot of the AI models are starting to include the links. So it's really important, again, to then click on those to understand more what the sources are that the AI is generating or creating from. Yeah.
All right. So this is one that I think we hear a lot of people who just want to tune out the news. They just want to turn it off and ignore it. But we know as teachers that's not always possible. It's not always desirable. So how can you address students or colleagues who just want to tune out the news?
Okay, that's a great question. That was also coming up in the comments a lot. In terms of just the news is overwhelming, it's depressing, self-care, mental health stuff. So one of the things though, for those who do want to feel like they're getting involved and they have a voice is to find platforms where student and educator voices are welcome. Jean, that's how we met. Jean's one of our News Hour Classroom advisors, but she's written some amazing blog pieces for us over the years. And we also have student voice blogs. So this one student wrote why schools should move toward climate action education. It was just a wonderful piece. So please let me know. I'll give you email contact information if your students or you are interested in sharing. And it can be about a variety of topics and current events. It can be more feature stuff and less of the controversial stuff. We also do a lot with, videos and video production. So we interviewed this wonderful teacher from Ghana. He's amazing. Youth robotics team from Ghana on what it took to get to the world championship. So that's what I mean by sort of, it doesn't have to be war necessarily kind of stuff. But yeah, so let us know if you're interested in a story there, but there's so many other outlets that also highlight people's voices. I can share that with you all in the comments in a bit. But we also have a student, my neighboring department is student reporting labs here at the PBS News Hour. So basically this is our youth journalism program and it is really awesome. Some of the pieces end up appearing on your local state media and some make it onto the national broadcast. They have this thing called Storymaker though, and it's for any teacher of any subject of multiple ages. They can get involved with helping express their students' voice and teaching them those basic video production, media literacy, journalism skills, and working with our folks here at PBS News Hour and the student reporting labs. They're really glad to help. They have this cool global toolkit because this night is about international news that deals with, I put the topics there, I don't have to read them, but all sorts of ways that you can connect your students' lives with kids across the planet.
Yeah. Andrew?
Yeah, so the first thing, which isn't on this slide, but going back to that issue of students who are wanting to tune out, I mean, the first thing to say is we, like PBS and others, of course, have a huge amount of content, and it's not all focused on the here and now, but as a I think a message of trying to read content that puts the flesh on the bones or kind of makes real with examples some of the theories that students might be learning, let's say in business or economics, for example, a report on interest rate changes, on budget cuts, on a corporate merger. All of them are kind of practical ways to understand the wider study and hopefully advance and get a good grade. But for those who are really, averse to engaging with news, a couple of other thoughts. One is, lots of non-topical content, or at least content that doesn't relate to current and depressing news, like culture. You can see here on the bottom right, for example, a piece from last week we did on music. We also do a number of games and simulations. You can see 2 here of them here. So they're kind of interactive. You can put yourself in the role of a football manager with all of the trade-offs of marketing campaigns and transfers of players and so on, to understand finance and business through sport, or cybersecurity, another example, something topical, and you can put yourself in the role of a decision maker and just play through those scenarios. Second slide, please, Charlie. If we move on. Yeah, and so, but this broader issue of disengagement with news, I mean, 2 final thoughts. One is this idea of making it participative and interactive. So we, for example, through our schools program, offer a series of competitions, including one where we invite students to write a blog. We publish the best one. You can see here on the left an example of social media and does it threaten democracy? So it's a way to hear and share their voices. And the second, the slides on the right, again, coming back to this question of suspicion around misinformation, I think it's more and more important, and more media are trying to give the story behind the story. So in this case, we publish regularly data about big trends in climate And we actually issued this newsletter explaining not only the context, but even the way in which the data was collected and is presented. So for those who want to understand more about the business, the process of high quality journalism, there are ways to build reassurance and actually provide lessons that could be very practical in a class around statistics or presentation of evidence, for example.
And before we move on to this next question, which I do want to move on, so we have time for question and answer at the end. I've seen a few come rolling in, but as questions occur to you, things you'd like to hear more of our thoughts about, please do stick those in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So here's one that we get a lot, especially from various corners of the country. What are some approaches for when there's apprehension or pushback about the teaching of current events? Something we hear from a lot of educators. One thing at CFR Education that we put out our mini simulations, and the really nice thing here is that it's no longer you, the teacher, who's telling students anything. You lay out an issue, a problem, a question for them, and then they step into the role of trying to solve that problem. They imagine that they are advisors to the president or members of the UN National Security Council, and they can talk about, gosh, what should we do about tensions in the Taiwan Strait? Or it's now a historical question, but should the United States ban TikTok to preserve national security? They can talk it through, try out their own ideas. There's not this sense of like, oh, the teacher is pushing a particular narrative, because you're not. You're laying out a question and supporting students as they work together to work through a problem. And that can be a really great way of framing an issue. Other things we find really helpful, if students are focused in on a particular current event and you're apprehensive, or people in your community are apprehensive about you talking about that event, go to the history, go to the timelines. When the attack, when the war in Gaza began, our historical timeline about issues going back to the 1940s became one of our most popular resources, because that was safe to talk about. And a lot of students didn't have that background at all. And so you're still helping them to build context and understanding of the current event by taking them through history of previous conflict, previous grievances. And those are maybe a little bit less of a hot button issue. Maps are always helpful. We can all stand to look at more maps more closely. They offer context. And hey, I bet you studying maps are in the standards for your social studies curriculum in your state. So kill two birds with one stone there. And then lean into infographics and data. Again, data literacy is always a good thing, and it helps students to just wrap their hands around the size and shape of a problem. Sometimes that's an easier conversation than what do we do about it. But just to appreciate, what is the problem? How big is the problem? Where is the problem? How does the problem work? And then send them out at the end of class to go think about what they might want to do about it, and spend your valuable time just talking about the problem itself. Jean, you've got some great ideas too about how to address some of these things.
Yes, absolutely. So I was in a district that did not embrace the initial rollout of AI. We were told that we couldn't teach any of the fun tools and gadgets that we were doing. So I wanted to address what was going on, because the kids were curious about AI and I knew they were using it outside of school day. So I had a lesson. I attacked it from an ethical standpoint. We wanted to look at research. We wanted to look at some of the data that was there. And so that's where, as a librarian, I came through and said, hey, we're going to look at some of the releases that are adjacent to AI, but I'm not necessarily teaching an AI-based, skill set. So if you go to the next slide, we got down into the nitty-gritty of it. I tried to define and understand and clarify so they could have an understanding what AI was in a loose sense, and then the biases and stereotypes and some of the ethical concerns that were embedded within what was being released at that time, ChatGPT and Google Gemini. Those were the things that we had to look at. And so because we did not have any rules on deck, so to speak, to set a precedent here in America, we went and we looked at the AI rules and rubrics and policies that were overseas in Europe, because this was happening. It was a global effect. And so I had my kids paraphrasing and putting policies into their own words so they could go to their school board and say, hey, this is what we are seeing about AI. This is what we're concerned with. And this is what we would like to see as policies or procedures. This is our input. So we had a rubric. There was a full-blown lesson, and you have a link to it in the slides, but it will give you a 6-week lesson on AI ethics, everything from terminology to research. I did this along with the Pulitzer Center. So this was there's a fellowship, a teacher's fellowship, and my created lesson was all on AI. Everything from interacting with the tools that wasn't allowed in my district, but that I did outside to teach educators what they could do in the classroom with age appropriate material. I have to specify that. But yeah, we had rubrics, we had articles that they can research, everything from prejudice against women's bodies to who had a voice in AI, whose voice was missing. Why is it that AI was being released in certain affluent neighborhoods? Maybe the digital divide that is there in between who has access to AI now versus who doesn't. So the repercussions for that and how that would affect us in a long range in the workplace. Like I said, this slide here, this is literally my kids taking our presentation, paraphrasing AI policies that they have read overseas into their own words and what they want to see here. This is the exact efforts. This is them in their own words. So I figured out a way to satiate their thirst for what was happening while it was happening, but of course respecting the guidelines as far as not being able to teach it directly, whether that was because they were age or because it was brand new. We still looked at it through a ethical privacy, importance of protecting civilian information, your private information, your biometric data, all of those things that are they were given consent and access to on their cell phones that they weren't even aware of. That was generative AI sourced, if I could say it like that, and then how they could protect themselves and what they wanted that protection to look and sound like. I gave them a seat at the table to kind of guide their steps on what they wanted to see and how they wanted to interact with AI when it was allowed by their school districts.
Thanks. This is maybe a good point for me to mention, there were some great screenshots of rubrics and plans and some links there. We will send out the slides for this in a follow-up email tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. You'll be able to click all the links, follow up, check out some of the things that that we all have linked to and dive deeper. Vicki, you had some ideas too about folks who, when there's some apprehension about the news, but you still want to teach it.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Andrew said this earlier. I think that going in the human interest feature direction is a great idea. Taking a little break from breaking news, from the politics. So this one story was just on the beautiful Mexican heritage of in Mexico, and the artists who talked about it, you learned a lot of history. This is through video news stories on the News Hour, and then accompanying questions. And the students, in like so many polls now for years, one of the top issues that comes up top for young people is climate and the environment, climate change, climate crisis. So the story, it's still a serious topic, yes, but the stories, hearing from people in Bangladesh about how these climate refugees are forced to adapt to rising sea levels, just so moving. So you really have a lot of good ethical conversations and maybe raising empathy. And Jean, one thing that's really phenomenal with the AI in terms of another sort of featurey story, but kids could really investigate is, Europe is taking quite a different approach to AI and privacy than America. And so just comparing and contrasting that way, and kids can figure out for themselves what they think is the better way. That's fine. That's what school is about. But and teachers, educators, you all are allowed to take a break from the news too. I really mean that. We won't be offended. Andrew and I will not be offended. Okay, this next one's mine too. So we had Dr. Uhuru Williams, some of you might know him. He talks a lot about history by proxy. So if talking about a current boycott is just too controversial for where you live, where your school is at, the idea of going back to the civil rights movement and teaching history by proxy, so through other historical events, could be quite helpful. Ryan Warenka, who's a huge CFR education, along with every other civic organizations out there, social studies teacher from Troy, Michigan. He's wonderful. I don't know if he's on the webinar tonight, but he says, Vic, have teachers focus on primary sources. So again, sort of that history by proxy, but the Constitution. So go back and when was the last time the Supreme Court ruled, or a court ruled on ICE, on deportations? Maybe not ICE, but just when was that last story? And going and looking at the rulings. You can research this all. This is all online. State standards. Sid Goldston is a educator, wonderful school administrator, retired on here, and she's been on. Raises the point so thoughtfully, guys. State standards, they are literally the law. Like if in terms of a good civics lesson, your legislators voted on them. So if it's in the standard, that's it. I'm teaching it because it's in the standard, and that's the law. So I'm obeying the law. And I go back to media literacy all the time. But go and talk about the story through a media literacy lens. Who else, if some of the topic content might be just too much. How was the story filmed? Who was interviewed? What questions would you have liked to ask? That's it.
Yeah, thanks. So what role can traditional news sources play? We've talked a lot about the importance of TikTok and Instagram, which I think maybe are the less traditional or more newfangled ones. How do you help kids to see those traditional news sources as still being valuable? Andrew, you represent a traditional news source, and Vicki, you do too.
Oh, Andrew, please go ahead. This
Yeah,
is my slide, but this has nothing to do with.
So-
we have a lot of shared thoughts on this.
Yeah. So I mean, it's true that we have a long history. We're over 100 years old, but the fact is we've evolved enormously from a print newspaper to a multimedia organization. So in terms of the style,
Andrew, I think you have to speak up a little bit.
I'm sorry. So in terms of the style
That's
and the format, we actually are on Instagram and TikTok. In terms of platforms, we have a lot of video, we have interactive graphics. So in terms of speaking in ways that make sense, we're very active. But also, I mean, I would stress, TikTok is not news. TikTok is a platform to transfer information or sometimes misinformation from elsewhere. So I think the values, the journalistic values of what we call here traditional organizations remain really fundamental. People who are going out, seeing things with their own eyes, engaging with the key players that are being talked about, verifying facts. It's those standards and values that remain most fundamental.
Yeah, and
I think
then
it's also,
sorry, Jean, go ahead.
no. I was just going to say,
quickly, oh yeah.
it's a matter of integrity. I think that's the line that's missing, that I feel like our social media news receivers don't get. Sometimes, as Andrew was saying, anyone can post anything on TikTok and it can go viral. That doesn't make them, sometimes they're a primary resource. They're live and they're on the streets and you can get valuable information. But I think there needs to be a lens of integrity and ethical that comes from the wisdom part from established news sources. And that's all I wanted to contribute.
I'm sorry, I was talking over you. Perfect. There's so many examples like this. By the way, Andrew Jack he's a journalist of many years, so we can point to him as a trusted, non-biased, reliable source, but someone who really cares and his ethical radar is up here. This gentleman on the screen here is Fred DeSam Lazaro. He does our Agents for Change series. So those stories about climate refugees in Bangladesh, and he goes abroad. And we have Council on Foreign Relations on the News Hour all the time. So look for those journals. They're really good people. Like, you can't help but really like Andrew when you meet him and respect his professionalism. I've not met Fred DeSam Lazaro. I guess technically we're colleagues. But man, you can see it and have those conversations with your students. Why do you think this guy has been doing this work for so long? What do you make of him? Let's look more about him online that we could find out. Maybe we can even reach out to him. So, but then last but not least, yes, traditional news outlets, we also heart social media these days and have our TikToks and Instagram and everything else, even old school ones like Financial Times and the PBS News Hour.
Yeah. And Jean, you had a great, another great lesson that you wanted to share about this question.
Sure. Okay, so this is an AI snapshot. It's a way to bring in a soft kind of Socratic or maybe journalism method. You can journal about your thoughts and get an argument. Take a stance, stand up on one side. And I love this one because it's the death of the journalist. You can argue on one side, automated reporting is the way. We can fact check it. It gets the information out there. That's what I want to stand by. Or we can have the argument of B, journalists are unlikely to be replaced. We cannot live without them. They are our wisdom, our age seasoning, vintage understanding of life and history. And so I love this because it's a way to have a healthy debate in a effective educational manner without the need for the technology. It's just the intellectual stimulation, critical thinking part. And I think that's something that we really need to focus on as we kind of chart these waters of AI, because I feel like we're going to have some kind of digital dementias if we rely too much on artificial intelligence, especially with our kids coming out, because it skips a couple of steps. And if you don't know what to look for or what to critically analyze, then you're going to fall victim to some of the things like not vetting your sources or, not understanding the context in which information is given and shared. And that's part of the literacy aspect of it. But I love this one because there's different, ideas and content areas that you can do these snapshots and start having discussions in a controlled, healthy manner.
Yeah. And so we wanted to end with a couple of closing thoughts. And again, we are going to take questions in about 3 minutes. So do add those to the Q&A. But as we look to the future, oh, sorry. What closing thoughts do we have?
I like that we are so global that we're learning from other nations. I know right now, like I have a post on my website about some of the scares we're having with learning that artificial intelligence can sometimes skew the truth or skew its data sets. And so some people are concerned. I want to look towards those nations that are taking the lead, that are helping to ease people's worries and concerns. So that being said, right now I'm looking at Denmark, who is doing some positive legislation on protecting people's intellectual freedom, likeness, and voice as it relates to artificial intelligence. They have gone another level in depth to make sure that you own your voice, you own your likeness, and no one can take it and make you do crazy things or say something that is so outrageous to your ethics and core. But for people who are in the public, they don't know the difference. And so they might believe that's you. And so holding society accountable for what the wonderful things that technology can do, but at a still dangerous level, because anyone that can take your voice and make it say do different things, that's scary. And I want to be able to have control over that. And I think Denmark is doing a wonderful job with getting that information out there and saying that, hey, the wonderful thing about human beings is that you can't copy, cut, and paste us. And I think that's a wonderful way to kind of look towards the horizon. Fred Rogers said it best: look for the people who are helping in the world. When something is going wrong, look for the helpers. And so that's my kick to you, Victoria, with PBS.
Yeah, I'd also look for folks who collaborate. And I think that just tonight is a great example. We all met, we did a South by Southwest. It's probably the first and last time I'll ever go to a South by Southwest. It was great, but it might be a big trip. But listen, a number of folks want the historical background before they teach current events. And I get that, which is why we lean on Council for Foreign Relations, CFR Education, to provide some of that. Or I might, in a recent story about tariffs and Trump, we linked to a Financial Times FT's awesome tariff tracker. And so look for organizations that are generous and collaborate with one another. I think that says a lot. That's sort of the whole point of civics and civic engagement. And so yeah, those are my closing thoughts. That kind of sort of the world global view, but right here tonight.
Andrew?
Yeah, look, I think all I'd say is that I still fundamentally believe that journalism is a public service and a public good. You know, it has a responsibility, it has a code of ethics, it is driven in its best form by verification, context, respect for the readers, and a distinction between news and opinion. Unfortunately, you know, we see a lot of even some media and certainly lots of other platforms, as we've discussed, which are increasingly polarized. But what tries to keep us honest and focused is that idea of, you know, we need to inform with facts to readers regardless of what their motivation is. But we do need to constantly think about new ways to engage, notably a younger generation, with different formats. And I think we're all of us are trying to focus on that as we really kind of try to encourage the next generation to be informed, responsible citizens.
And I'll just say, keep teaching the headlines, keep teaching the news. It's important for so many of the reasons we talked about tonight. And even though it's hard, there are ways to do it. There are ways to do it well. There are ways to do it in ways that protect you and protect their students. And so keep it up, because it is so, so important for our students and their futures. We'll just say a couple quick words. If you want to know more about CFR Education, you can click there. That's what our website looks like. It's great, and hope you'll check it out. Jean?
Yes. So I'm a librarian through and through, and next month is Banned Books Week and Banned Books Month. So I have to give some support. Please get out there and support your libraries. Our funding is on the chopping block. I don't know if you were aware, if our audience is aware, but the Institute of Museum and Library Services, they had their funding cut, all of their grants, a lot of their grants. And that was to, you know, make sure everyone had equitable library services. Please get out there and support your public libraries, your school libraries. And I am here to offer any advice or suggestions as an education consultant, as a librarian. And please visit my blog, Awaken Librarian, because I'm out there spitting truths. I'm holding people accountable, especially as it relates to artificial intelligence and information literacy. I am doing the dirty work, the nitty gritty, as my grandmama used to say. But please get out there and support and believe in your libraries.
Is fix information?
Yep, thanks so much. That's it. There it is. I think we're going to share the slideshow, so please feel free to get in contact with me.
And Andrew?
Yeah, so just a reminder, you know, do sign up. You've got nothing to lose. It's totally free. Our resources. It just needs a high school teacher, staff member to register on our site, and then you can get access to all our content, to a weekly newsletter, and to many specialist resources like those you see there on our schools page.
Great. Thank you so much. And so let's head to the Q&A. And so as I said, use that Q&A function at the bottom of the screen if you want to add a question. And I can start reading some because we have some already here. All right. So we have one. How has the thirst for news literacy changed over time? Is this shift by teens a new trend? Is it related to COVID? I think so, specifically that wanting to be literate, wanting to understand how the news works. What are we seeing out there? I don't know, anyone who wants to take that on. Are we seeing that students are more savvy, like looking for that news literacy?
Sorry, go ahead.
No,
I was just going to say, I mean, certainly it's kind of interesting because I think you see so much at different ages. I've been in a few classrooms recently where I actually get the impression the students are kind of more savvy sometimes than their parents. You hear them talking about it. I think this current generation is already a little bit more suspicious, quite rightly, of TikTok and the addiction and the distraction of devices than the previous one. It's changing very fast. News literacy, I mean, I think, yeah, a lot of it has come in as we've seen this explosion of disinformation, part of it through social media and just more generally. And Jean was talking about Denmark earlier. It's interesting to me when you look at some of the countries, notably in Scandinavia, Finland and so on, they've long been, on the one hand, used to a barrage of disinformation coming from countries to the east, which has made them more savvy and engaged around it. But they've also got actually a greater faith in their government and in society and collective action than some other societies. So I think there's some wider structural lessons and cultural differences between different parts of the world.
Thank you. And there's Andrew doing exactly what we talked about, is look to other countries as an example. If it's, you don't want to talk about ours, that's always a good way to bring some more context and point of view to the conversation. This next one, I think, maybe also is a good one for the journalists in the room, and it's about that question of sometimes maybe this is thinking in particular about journalists, but I do think teachers have this tendency as well. They try to talk about things in an unbiased way or an even-handed way. And sometimes that results in sort of normalizing unusual behavior or radical behavior. And so there can be that tension between, you want to present both sides, but also sometimes you do need to call out the thing that's unprecedented or the thing that is way off the deep end in one direction or the other. And how do you think about weighing that so you're not normalizing something that maybe shouldn't be normalized?
Yeah, you have to call it out. if it's blatant racism or homophobia, or you have your protocols, you are all professional teachers. This is one of the best professions there is. And so you have the skills, and if you're unsure, there's obviously, colleagues, you can ask professional development up at the wazoo about this. But no, that history and those facts need to be taught. I agree with the premise of the question. There is a lot of self-censorship going on, maybe in places where it might not be warranted, let's say. And so, yes, teach facts and evidence. That's key.
I think also as a former teacher, a couple other things to think about. How many of us have a school motto or a poster on the wall that says something about respect or compassion or, helping out your classmates or whatever? Sometimes it's easier to talk about, a speech or a policy or something by just saying, what would Principal so-and-so say if someone talked like that? And not even engage in the are they Republicans or Democrats or leftists or rightists or whatever, but just ask students, take it out of that context. That can be really valuable. I think there are ways to talk about these things. It's kind of reject the premise of, oh, this is a left versus right, or this is a us versus them kind of a thing, and change the conversation in a way that sometimes is even more engaging for students. So I know that's one technique as a teacher to think about.
I think you also have to keep in mind that it's not me versus you, it's us against the problem, and how we're going to get past that, how we're going to overcome it, how is it going to elevate somebody or empower someone. Whenever I look at a situation as dicey or controversial, who stands to gain the power and why, and who deserves or who should have a power, what's another perspective that you can have on this topic that empowers a person that you didn't think, a background that you didn't consider, or a perspective that you don't have a lot of experience in it, but they can stand to gain something from this topic. So just turning over the microphone and seeing who else can contribute or whose voice is missing. That's something that we can look at from an angle as far as addressing those topics that are a little bit controversial in a healthy manner.
Here's a great one. This questioner says, they've gotten to the point where their students realize they're using a lot of TikTok, and maybe more TikTok than they want to be using. But also, it's really entertaining. TikTok is. How do we, as teachers, as librarians, as journalists, how do we get students interested in, excited about, or I'll use scare quotes here, serious news about the journalism and learning about the world? How do we spark that interest?
I could have a go. I
Cause
mean,
and
I think,
effect.
go ahead, Jean.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think making things interactive, a debate, putting students on different sides of a discussion, getting them to negotiate, imagining like we see in a model UN competition or a school debate over a particular issue. So they're kind of engaging actively. And then secondly, actually, I think maybe acting as journalists themselves, there's no better way to understand and appreciate what's involved than to go out and report yourself and then to write it and to fact check it and to get feedback. So turn it, from the passive to the active, I think is really important. And you can definitely, in reporting, have a lot of fun. There's no reason everything has to be serious or negative. What it should be is factual, but also creative.
I was going to say something along the lines of kids want to know the immediate effects. They want to know the here and now. How is this going to help? How is this going to benefit? And that's where I feel like their platforms, as far as what they can use and how they can use social media to affect the change, they can get out there and be the primary resource. If this is something that is happening in the United States, get into your community and find out what's happening regarding this topic locally. Be the newsbreaker. Say, hey, this is something that we discuss in class, and now I'm out here in the world trying to figure it out. Take ownership of it. I think that's what we really need to get our kids to come back to, especially as it relates to real world events. You can complain about it, you could talk about it, but what are you actually going to do about it? And then holding them accountable for those actions, because as in every facet of this world, accountability matters. And so when you see an event, understand it, analyze it, but then take action. So many of us are consumers and recipients of a lot of income and information, and we're not picking up the tools that we need in order to transform that information that we've received into tangible actions. So I would encourage my students to get out there, as Andrew was just saying, you become the reporter, you become the journalist, because you can stick your head in the sand and act like it doesn't exist, or you can get out there and affect some change. And we want to empower our students to shape the boat and guide the boat in the direction that you need it to go. And so you can feel empowered and a part of the society that you live in, this global society that we live in.
And Jean, that civic action really starts in the classroom. I mean, where else is it going to be taught? Obviously the home. So I shouldn't say where else, but clearly school, this is all these different groups of people, all these different individuals who are there. But civic action really starts a lot of times with civil dialogue, civic discourse. So many good resources on civic discourse and civil dialogue, you guys, and teachers, again, those protocols that you follow about how to have these types of conversations in thoughtful ways. You know what to do. And if you're not sure, again, go and research and talk to colleagues who have these types of conversations with their kids, because I think students do want to talk a lot of times about serious issues. That's often what we're asked about when we go and we talk to students. And we all do like some TikTok entertainment every now and then ourselves, I admit it.
Yeah. We have time maybe for a quick final question, and there's actually two that are along very similar lines. One from someone who I'm guessing is a teacher talking about their students, and the other really interesting is from a teacher trainer talking about teachers. And the question is, how do you make sure that people, when they read the news, are thinking critically and are making those connections between what they read in the news and their deeper knowledge, their broader knowledge about the world? How do you help them to make those connections from the constant churn of the latest headline to wider understandings and thinking critically and in the bigger picture? Any wisdom on that?
I'm not going to go on the latter. I leave it to the teachers as the experts on the first one. But in terms of making it real, putting the context. I mean, certainly everything we write, we try to put context. For example, the question here asked about the impact between current events and jobs. Well, look at the government shutdown that's currently threatened. And our article on that today talks about how that cost the US economy $3 billion that's not been ever recovered, for example. So the historical context, reality today, and then thinking about the way in which the two interrelate and the impact that something now is having by asking a whole range of folks who are exposed to those issues.
Yeah. I think that's something that this is something that you as the teacher, to be able to look at the story and lead students to that connection to whatever the bigger theme or topic or concept is that you've talked about at some point in class. And ask them to draw those connections. I mean, and that's a lot, CFR Education has some great things to help sort of understand those conceptual understandings or to decode some of the ways in which decisions are made in global events. And that can be a really great way to draw students in. So we have reached the top of the hour. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Jean, Vicki, and Andrew for being on this panel. As we said, you should get an email tomorrow with a follow-up, a recording, a link to the slides suitable for forwarding to your friends and colleagues who may not have been able to make it tonight. That also, those slides include all of our contact information. So I know we all love to hear from you to continue the conversation if questions occur to you down the road, or there are other ways in which we can support you in your work in the classroom teaching about global issues and the headlines in the news. So thank you all so much. Have a great evening and have a great day in school tomorrow. Bye-bye.